at Public Land and Ocean Colectivo. If we can go to the next slide, please. In a nutshell, the Green Latinos Public Land and Ocean Colectivo brings together everybody who know that our ocean and that our public lands are our salvation for our ability to live on a thriving planet now. They're what we borrow from future generations, and that it's our responsibility to steward them and our opportunity to steward them so that we can make it out of this climate crisis better than we came into this world. So this is a place where you connect with others who share those values, ask for support, ask for ideas, and just find ways to have a very successful time in your defense of public land and ocean. To our next slide, please, then. What we're going to do today is basically overview what's been going on with the Trump administration, some of their executive orders, the impact of the funding freeze, happenings with courts and agencies, different appointees, to give you the overview of how the Trump policies and the people that are being placed in the cabinet are impacting public land, the ocean, and our comunidades. As you know, or may know, there is a secret review that still hasn't been released to the public, which is going to attempt to completely dismantle the existence of national monuments, areas that are protected from mining, resource management plans that are preventing species from going extinct, and protecting clean water for communities, and more. So after we do this interview, we're gonna jump into a community exploration of what are the threatened places by this secret review happening at the interior, that we're poised to defend or want to be poised to defend, so that we can show up as strong supporters for each other and make sure that we have across the Green Latinos Network the resources that we need to succeed in defending these sacred and cherished places. And then Pedro's going to leave us with an action that you can take today for conserving the very also culturally significant and sacred monarch butterfly species. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Camila Cáceres, new to the team, to introduce herself and lead our icebreaker activity. Gracias.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Camila. I am the new water and ocean advocate at Green Latinos. So thank you so much for joining us. And just to lighten the mood before we get into some somber news, I wanted to see, which mood dang captures your mood for the last 100 days. And mood dang is a very famous baby pygmy hippo from Thailand. So if you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, what has been your mood 1 through 9 the last 100 days or so? We're getting 7, 8, 6. So a little sad, a little startled. Yeah, lots of 8s. Personally, I would be like a 3, just struggling, resisting. Okay, we got a 4, running with all your might. I love that. Yeah, it's good to check in on your mood, check in on your coworkers' moods. It's definitely been quite the start of the year, hasn't it? Number 1, yes, number 1's also very relatable, I would say. Gotta channel that energy. Yeah, hard team 8 for sure. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you get to learn a lot. And as usual, please, reach out if you have any questions or comments. Next slide.
And so for here, we're turning it to the amazing Andrea Marpiero Colomina, who's going to dive us right into what's up with executive orders. So Andrea, please introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I was writing in the chat that number 6 is basically number 8, but laying down. So, like screaming, but also laying down. But great to be here. I'm Andrea. I was formerly the Sustainable Communities Program Director here at Green Latinos, and now I have moved into a new role as a policy research and data analytics advisor. And so one of the first things I did this year and in this new role is spend a little bit of our time sort of thinking about the whiplash of Trump executive orders and the implications for the work that we do and for our comunidad and comunidades. And so there's so much we could talk about here. None of it is good, unfortunately, despite the smile I'm trying to keep on my face just because I'm happy to be here with all of you. For the sake of time today, we're going to be talking about 5 of the executive orders. I just also want to, I know there's going to be a bit of jargon thrown out, so I just want to, so bear with me, apologies, because sort of unavoidable jargon, particularly when we start talking about different federal agencies. But I just want to step back for a second and talk about the fact that there have been many Trump executive actions, and executive actions is the all-encompassing term for any kind of action that Trump has taken in, since he came into office on January 20th. And these are divided into different categories, and the categories have sort of different levels and levers of power. So an executive order is sort of the highest of this category, which essentially is like an order that Trump puts out that comes from the executive and is directing specific federal agencies under the executive branch's purview to take specific actions and often have a deliverable or a time frame for those actions. Whereas an executive memo and other sort of presidential memo, other things that Trump has done don't have quite the weight of executive orders. And so that's part of the reason that today we're focusing on 5 executive orders, 6 really, because those executive orders are the ones that have the most power to be turned into actionable items and have direct actions for agencies tied into the language, the structure, and the demands of the order. So the first one we're going to be talking about is the Unleashing American Energy executive order, and also secretarial order. We'll talk about that when we get there. So next slide, please. So the Unleashing American Energy executive order, fortunately, bad news all around. Huge, a huge shakeup in existing climate policy in the United States, is pulling back a huge amount of existing environmental regulations, is encouraging fossil fuel exploration, is pushing for increased production of fossil fuels on federal lands and waters, including the Outer Continental Shelf, pausing disbursement of IRA and IIJA funds. So I'm sure that many of you are either directly affected by this through the organizations that you work with, or you've heard about this affecting organizations that you have relationships with. Or it's particularly in the early days, as we're still in the early days, but I say in the first month of the Trump administration, there was a lot of concern and fear about funds being paused or being taken away. And this has really been, far-reaching everywhere from funds for tree planting, funds for education, funds for infrastructure related to energy production and consumption. The other major thing here, without getting into too many details, is basically there's just been a huge abandonment of any kind of addressing of social cost of carbon, any kind of work that's being done through the executive branch really relating to impacts from potentially environmentally damaging actions, impacts to communities, impacts from, trying to find climate forward or climate centric solutions, programs, policies. There's been just an overall complete reversal of any kind of climate oriented policy making from the Trump administration on day one, really setting the tone. And the specific accompaniment to that's relevant to this group is the secretarial order for the Secretary of the Interior, which directs the Department of Interior to basically, as Olivia was alluding to in her introduction, rescind any protections for national monuments, rescind any protections for critical habitats, put the hold on or re-examine resource management plans, which would be oriented towards conservation and potentially increase oil and gas leasing programs on public lands. So this is an incredibly damaging, these two orders together are incredibly damaging for sort of thinking about the relationship of public lands to energy, because it's clear here that the Trump administration is regarding public lands as essentially a resource for energy production, consumption, and production. Next slide, please. Bad news continues. The Putting America First in International Environmental Agreements, EO. So this essentially withdraws the United States from the Paris Agreement that was negotiated under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It claims that, the sort of the idealism behind this executive order is that, these internationally oriented agreements about climate change mitigation don't align with the United States' priorities. So this sort of puts us as a country in a really strange relationship with other nations that we have negotiated with and worked cooperatively with on international climate strategies. Unfortunately, this is going to have really direct impacts on Latino communities. There's a statistic out there that about 71% of Hispanic adults in the United States say that climate change affects their local communities. About 1.78 million Latinos, so close to 2 million Latinos in the United States live in communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate harms. So this is incredibly potentially harmful, in the medium and certainly in the longer term for Latino communities. There is one nice little bright spot here, which is right after this executive order came out on January 21st, Bloomberg Philanthropies announced that they will be helping to cover the costs of the US's participation in the UN climate budget. So they'll basically be stepping in and picking up the part of the bill that used to be the United States' government part of the bill and supporting US state and city efforts to stay on track to meet US and global climate goals. So this is a sort of faint silver lining. And it's incredible to think that a major philanthropist is now playing the role of the US government when it comes to international climate policy and international climate strategy, but here we are. Next slide, please. The third EO that we're going to focus on this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, is the Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential EO. Unfortunately, so this is like sort of like a sibling of the energy EO, really eyeballing Alaska and eyeballing protected lands in Alaska and in the waters surrounding Alaska as potential places to drill for oil and destroy previously protective habitats. So this is a real ugly long-term loss for short-term gain, which would not, it goes without saying, would not be a short-term gain for communities, would not be a short-term gain for the people living anywhere near these public lands, with huge, potentially catastrophic climate damage consequences. So, thinking about this implication in the sort of implications of this EO in Alaska for the bigger picture of Latino communities. Obviously, there's huge potential, implications and consequences of the destruction of public lands and additional exposure to pollutants. And overall in the United States, 1.8, so close to 2 million Latinos live within a half a mile of an existing oil and gas facility. That tells you something. There's a lot of existing oil and gas facilities in the United States. We don't really need any more. So this, again, right, is really showing the sort of short look, profit oriented. I don't even know profit for who, certainly not for the American people, of this kind of EO. Next slide, please. So the fourth EO is a more recent EO. It was announced last week. And it's a twofer. So it's actually two separate EOs, but we're talking about them together because they're so closely related. So the first is the addressing the threat to national security from the imports of lumber and timber EO. Pretty straightforward in that it essentially is directing the Secretary of Commerce to investigate whether there is any national security risk, very broad term here, related to the US's increasing dependence on imported in lumber, and therefore, maybe make some recommendations. The Secretary of Commerce, I believe, has 170 days to make recommendations related to changing the US lumber and timber import policy based on what they find. And then the second, the sort of yin to this yang, is the immediate expansion of American timber production. So you can kind of see what's going on here, right? The Secretary of Commerce is going to be directed to investigate whether there's any national security risks related to US quote unquote increasing dependence on imported timber and lumber. And then if and should they decide that there is this mandate to immediately expand American timber production. So directs the relevant agencies in the in the executive branch, so USDA, the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, to issue updated guidance and tools to facilitate an increase in lumber production. So what this really would mean is that these agencies, which previously have been tasked with, or in theory continue to be tasked with, coming up with a strategy for national resource production and extraction that protects old growth forests, that protects the large swaths of public land, that protects critical habitats, would essentially be instructed or be giving updated guidance to disregard those previous concerns. So, and it uses emergency powers, although the emergency here is not really clearly stated, to fast track logging projects and circumvent environmental regulations. So, disastrous effects for species, disastrous effects potentially for clean water, for salmon, for wildlife, for habitats, for climate stability, for reducing, heat, for reducing production of oxygen, increased traffic, even potentially from increased logging. There's sort of a disaster after disaster here. And this is a really new EO. So for those of you whom this is new information, or for whom this is particularly relevant to the work that you do, I really encourage you to keep an eye, because this, the first news about this came out last week, and I think people are still really catching up on, whether they, media and also other environmentally oriented organizations are also sort of catching up on what the response is going to be. So organization around this EO is still information and certainly very much still happening. Next slide, please. Finally, the last executive order we're going to talk about today is the designating English as the official language of the United States EO. So this is essentially it looks a little bit different on its face. The name of it is a little bit misleading, right? And essentially what this EO does is it rescinds a previous executive order that requires entities that receive federal funds to provide language assistance. So essentially, the language access that previously existed as a part of a federal grant requirement has been rescinded. So this allows government agencies and organizations that receive federal funding to choose whether they're going to continue to offer documents and services in English, in languages other than English. So the good news is that there's going to be government agencies and organizations that continue to sort of operate the way they've been operating, or perhaps are even further motivated to produce documentation and services in languages other than English. The flip side of it is that in jurisdictions where, for example, the local government is hostile to non-English language speakers, that local government that was receiving federal funds is no longer going to be required to offer language assistance for non-English speakers and people who require translation. So the challenge here really is that there's going to be a lot of limitations in certain places to access to public information and to participation in local and regional decision-making processes. So, for example, there may not be translation provided at public hearings. There may not be documents provided relevant to the issue at hand in documents other than English, et cetera, et cetera. So this could be potentially really harmful in places where there's a Spanish speaking or other non-English speaking population that has consistently faced significant challenges and barriers to participation and has gone unheard, because this is just going to compound and exacerbate that. I put in parentheses just at the bottom of this, just so that people are aware of the fact that there are already 30 states that have English only laws in place. So that means in those 30 states, any kind of public forum, decision-making process, et cetera, that didn't have federal funds was already taking place in English only. And so unfortunately, what this is going to do is going to make those barriers to entry even higher. And that's all for now. Not a very bright horizon. Sorry to not be the bearer of better news. But I think it would be, I don't know, Olivia, do you want to have a little bit of discussion now, or should we just wait until the end of, I know other people have to present some of the stuff that, should we have?
Yeah, I want to invite, if you in the audience have a burning question that you want to put on the table right now, please come off mute or use the raise hand function. We'll take one. Otherwise, we'll move on to Noreen, who's so gracefully joined us from the ACLU. So pause for questions.
I have a
Dolly.
question. So, do you think that the Bloomberg philanthropies are helping out? Do you think the Trump administration could revoke their tax exemption because they're a nonprofit, or maybe consider them a terrorist because of what they're supporting?
That's a really great question. With the Trump administration, I would say never, but I would say Bloomberg Philanthropies in particular is like pretty well resourced and probably has some really good lawyers. So they would be pretty good at fighting back against any kind of, thing like that the Trump administration could possibly consider doing.
Okay, great. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Lou.
Yeah, about this executive order designating English as the official language. So do you have any idea of what this might do to the 2030 census, which I'm sure the planning for that has already started, especially if Trump goes back to wanting to include a citizenship question in the census, which he tried to do the last time around. This is kind of scary, what it might do to the census.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gotten that far in my thinking, to be honest with you, but I think that you're raising a really important flag, and I'm sure that it has implications, or even perhaps in its intention was designed to have some kind of implication for the 2030 census. Because if the 2030 census is administered only in English, you're going to have a really different response than you would if it was administered multilingually, as it has been, I think, for the past 30 years since the law was put in place by Clinton.
So true. Thank you, Lou, for your question, and thanks for your responses, Andrea. With that, if you'll go to the next slide, please, Kumbia. Noreen Shaw, Acting Director of Government Affairs of the Equality Division at the American Civil Liberties Union, aka the ACLU, has graciously joined us today to talk about how federal funding is being weaponized to control communities and our natural resource decision, as well as our community care decisions. So, Noreen, please take it away.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I'm trying to join my video, but my computer seems to be on the fritz, so I'm going to turn it off to not hurt people's eyes. So I'm going to speak particularly about HR 32, which is a bill that we call the Defund Our Communities Act. And I'm going to drop in the chat basic guidance on that act. So the bill is the Trump administration and congressional Republicans essentially teaming up to threaten jurisdictions all over the country with the loss of all federal funding by calling them sanctuary jurisdictions. And the bill defines sanctuary jurisdictions in two ways that can be pretty broadly construed. And even just taking one of the ways that the bill defines sanctuary jurisdictions, which is those that have a practice or policy of not holding people for ICE in their local jails, we have a list from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, of the jurisdictions they consider to be non-cooperative, and it is 697 jails, which are spread across dozens of states and many congressional districts that are represented by Republicans and Democrats who would not at all think that they are representing sanctuary states or cities. So this is a bill that allows the Trump administration to weaponize federal funding once again to go after our communities. While it's couched in terms of immigration and sanctuary, it would threaten to cut all federal funding or any federal funding. And it presents a real threat to the constitutional balance of powers, the idea that state and local governments can make decisions about how to use their own resources. And I've been working with law enforcement officials, former and current, who have real concerns about the bill from a law enforcement perspective, that they don't want to have to be at the beck and call of ICE all the time. And if they don't agree to do whatever ICE says, that means that the local bus line might not function, or a local Meals on Wheels program would lose federal funding. I mean, the implications are really terrible. And that's, of course, by design, because what this bill is and what the Trump administration's larger threats of cutting federal funding are really an attempt to put the squeeze on any political opposition in the country, put the squeeze on jurisdictions that are represented in many cases by Democrats, and really just force everyone to toe the line. Today it's on immigration. Yesterday it was on DEI and trans students, and tomorrow it will be on whatever it is that they decide they want to force everybody into. So we have been working with a large coalition of organizations to get all House Democrats to oppose this bill. We should be able to get some Republicans to oppose it as well, but right now the focus is just getting all House Democrats. If you look at the Google document, you'll see that we just had a hearing last week in the House Oversight Committee where mayors of Denver, Colorado, Chicago, Illinois, Boston, and New York came and had to testify before the House Oversight Committee and really got grilled. And there's House Republicans on the committee saying, "You've got blood on your hands. You've let these criminals roam free." I mean, literally told them they had blood on their hands. One of the members of the committee referred the mayors to the Justice Department for prosecution ostensibly for harboring immigrants, which didn't really make any sense. And the committee wasn't a success, or the committee hearing was not a success for the Republicans, and that the mayors actually did a really great job in defending their policies, defending immigrant communities, and defending really our nation. And the Republicans, for the most part, were not that effective. So they didn't get the momentum that they needed. But this bill, HR 32, could go to a floor vote after the next House recess. And it would go straight to the floor. It would not need to go through committee. And so we are still bracing for the floor vote. It's been postponed twice now, which is a good sign. And so what we are making sure people understand is that, one, the message that seems to be resonating for Democrats is to frame this as part of that broader weaponization of federal funding. It's, you can disagree about sanctuary policies, but what we all agree on is that our community shouldn't have to be held hostage to the Trump administration's whims. That's not good for our democracy. That's not good for public safety either. And we are looking for support, organizations sending letters of opposition, reaching out to the members who are identified on this document. And if you do decide to reach out at the end of this Google document, you'll see there's a Google Drive, and the Google Drive has a bunch of resources that have already been put together by groups. So you'll see the congressional district breakdown that I mentioned that we did, that is all the congressional districts that would be impacted by the bill. A letter from state and local elected leaders from around the country opposing the bill, a letter from the U.S. Conference of Mayors from a bipartisan group of mayors opposing the bill. Really all the letters that I'm seeing, I'm trying to put into this Google Drive so we can all quickly share it and just make sure that members understand that there is broad opposition beyond the usual groups opposing this bill. And I see it as really the one front in this much larger battle over the weaponization of federal funding. We're also really concerned about, even without Congress handing the Trump administration these powers, the Trump administration trying to assert unilaterally that they can cut federal funding, which they're doing right now across a lot of different issue areas. So with that, I'll stop and happy to answer any questions, and apologies that my video is not working right now.
Gracias, Noreen. Thank you so much for this overview. Esperanza.
Yes, thank you very much for that information. It's very concerning. I'm curious because you mentioned that you're working with a lot of different organizations around this, and wondering, is there if any of those organizations, how we can find out if any of those organizations are in our own state or in our own cities, so that we can, if there's an interest in having others join those efforts within those organizations, because people are there's all kinds of groups and so on that are springing up because of this crisis, right?
Mhm.
And but there are organizations that have been around for a long time doing this work. So how do you suggest that people kind of plug in, even, people from the community plug in, and where? Thank you.
Well, for kind of a lighter lift, things that people can do that don't take a lot of time, we have a call action asking people to make calls to their members of Congress, which is listed in this document, and I just dropped it in the chat, but it's also in the Google document that I shared. To be linked to the other organizations, the Google Drive that I shared had the list of, it was a letter from 500 plus organizations. So you can see that list. We don't have it broken down by state, which is actually a really good idea to do. So that gives me an idea of something we could do if we have time. And, in lieu of that, I think people getting together and saying, we're going to make calls to our member of Congress, we're going to ask for a meeting. That's really important. I expect that we're pretty good on most Democrats, but certainly not the Democrats that we have listed here. We're not certain about them. So it really depends on how important it is for you to reach out to your member. I think it's always important, and just calling and leaving that message is important. But if you are in one of these congressional districts, that's particularly important. It's really, it's about the moderate Dems, the battleground Dems, who hear the word immigration and think, oh, I'd better vote yes if it's an anti-immigrant bill. I mean, that's essentially their psychology right now.
One thing I'll point out about Jared Golden on this list, if you or a loved one or a constituent of his, that's Maine, right? He's on the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on Federal Lands, who today just had a hearing on a different bill that is using anti-immigrant reasoning to attack public lands, mainly through weaponization of the border or militarization of the border and other provisions that are just very dehumanizing to immigrants. So I would say that's if you're really particularly interested in somebody who has a big role in public land administration, Jared Golden might be a really interesting target as you figure out connecting your conservation advocacy to this national crisis to our democracy. Renette?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this awesome presentations, both of them. So I do have a couple of questions, but just wanted to start by saying a comment. I think, obviously the Trump administration sucks. Sorry to be so blunt, but it's going to galvanize us. It's going to really galvanize us and get our community going. So I really appreciate the folder that you shared, Noreen. I was wondering, is there a way we can, as a collective, start having these like monthly check-ins? Because I envision us, I'm from Southern California, and I can envision us having like 30-minute Zoom calls where we all just email our senator, make phone calls. It's like a working meeting. So I would love to connect with maybe Jonathan from Green Latinos or anyone else on this call for that matter, Olivia, to see if we can kind of get this ball rolling, because we used to do this in one of our environmental clubs when I was in college, and we would have like a one meeting dedicated towards writing to our senators, writing to whomever we want to advocate for. So I would love a sort of follow-up call and seeing how can we kind of coordinate in those high priority areas that I think one of the documents mentioned. And then that's just my kind of long-winded comment. My question is there a sort of like a one pager that I can share with local leaders that say, hey, this is kind of the game plan. This is how we advocate. This is how we create a compelling message to galvanize people, because I have a lot of friends that are environmentalists, but it's just overwhelming. Every single day there's something new. So to combat that sort of sense of overwhelm, maybe having some sort of concise action that we can do or a game plan that we can present. And if there isn't anything like that, I'd be happy to like help in any way that I can.
Noreen, what would you advise? So a little bit about Rene's background. He works at the San Gabriel Valley Conservation Corps, right? Did I get the G right?
Yes, thank you for
Where, do you want to explain a little bit about like your mission, your activities, and maybe that can give Noreen a good idea of like a role for you or your org to play with the wide range of different action opportunities that she presented.
Yeah, absolutely, Olivia. Thanks. Yeah, so I work for a small nonprofit in LA County. Essentially, we're a job training program for young adults, 18 to 26. As a certified conservation corps, we focus solely on conservation projects like tree planting, habitat restoration, a lot of things in our adjacent San Gabriel Mountains. So the whole Limber EO is new to me. I didn't hear about this, so I definitely want to follow up with our collaborative that work in the mountains. So as a individual myself, I want to advocate as much as I can, but as working for a nonprofit, I know we're a bit constrained when it comes to lobbying, I guess. But for the most part, I'm also an advisor for our students. We partner with the charter school. As a conservation corps, we have to have some form of high school educational component. So I advise our student government, and this is a project that I kind of want them to take on, even if it's just sending an email, making a few phone calls, but kind of embodying that 30-minute, 1 hour meeting, just walking them through what's going on, expressing that we do have a voice and it is important, but also strategizing with other local groups, perhaps, and kind of creating this sort of small action game plan that really adds up over the course of a few months.
I mean, I think that connecting the dots between your work and that of your colleagues and this bill is really important. And the best way I can think to do that is actually to, and not something that I could create, but maybe that you or your people who you work with could create based on some of the materials that we've written that are in this Google Drive, and really just adapting them to make those links. The reality is a bill like this or any of these federal funding cut efforts have so many impacts that we actually don't do them justice when we summarize them, and we just say, like from the ACLU, I'll say, this could mean that, you lose any federal funding. And then I give a couple of examples, but I don't even think that really captures it. Like to be able to say, to get a letter from somebody that says, this is what I do for my community, and I won't be able to do it anymore if you take away the state of California's funding and if you take away my city's funding, and if basically everybody's afraid to do their work because the federal government is coming for all of our federal funding. Some communities are impacted also because it's not that they get federal funding directly, but they get state funding, and states are going to be in a budget squeeze when they lose their federal funding, or they may get matching grants or something like that from the state. So it's all very specific. I think that specificity is really important for members of Congress to hear, because they'll take these votes without really thinking it all through. There are a couple of California members who are surprisingly bad on this bill. So you would think that for a state like California, everything would be fine, but that's not necessarily the case with your members of Congress.
Thank you, Noreen. This is so valuable and so important. I cannot express enough how meaningful it is to connect across sectors as a group of conservation and environmental justice focused orgs. So thank you for your advice. Great job on pulling all of these resources together. We're glad to keep distributing them out through our community, and maybe we will build something that helps connects the dots and drives action forward. How can people get in touch with you later on if they want to follow up?
I'll drop my email in the chat.
Okay. Muchas gracias. With that, now I'm going to pass it over to Val, who's going to jump us into court and agency happenings along with a few other team members. Val, you want to introduce yourself and then take it away?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Val Schul, Water Equity and Ocean Program Director here at Green Latinos. And today I'm going to be giving you the 411 on what's happening in terms of the federal agencies. And then I'll be able to pass it on to some of the other GL staff to talk further in terms of some of the intricacies that are related to that, as well as what's happening in the Supreme Court as it relates to, public lands and some of the ocean work that we work on here at Green Latinos. Next slide, please. So I'm just starting y'all off in terms of the confirmed agency leadership. Are starting off here with some of Trump's cabinet members that have been confirmed in their appointments. These secretaries that are shown here hold positions of leadership in key agencies that manage our public land and ocean. So I'll start off on the far left. That's Doug Burgum. He's the former North Dakota governor, and he's made his money as a software entrepreneur selling his business to Microsoft for more than $1 billion. Obviously, he's a billionaire who, even during his confirmation hearing, indicating willingness to view public land and oceans as Americans' financial spreadsheet, and promoted the rhetoric that we heard previously from Andrea about the executive order of American energy dominance. So as Secretary of Interior, Burgum is charged with implementing Trump's drill baby drill promise. And we're suspecting that he would make it easier for energy companies to tap fossil fuel resources, including that on public lands and ocean. In the middle, we have Howard Lutnick. So Lutnick, he's another billionaire, made his fortune as a financial service executive. He holds a position as Secretary of Commerce that would put him at the center of Trump's promised trade wars with China and other nations, including Mexico and Canada. Additionally, as Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick oversees the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA. Lutnick promised not to break up the agency as called for in Project 2025 during his confirmation hearings. And this sparked no further questions brought forth by Democrats about climate science at the agency and whether scientific integrity would be protected. However, Lutnick later wrote, it is premature to discuss any specific recommendations related to this question about breaking up NOAA. Given these actions and Lutnick's successful confirmation vote, proposal to dismantle or privatize NOAA that are outlined in Project 2025 could in fact advance in upcoming days. And finally, we have Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture. And so the Secretary of Agriculture oversees many entities under the USDA, including the U.S. Forest Service. Before her role as Secretary of Agriculture, Rollins served as the founder, president, and chief executive officer of the American First Policy Institution. She also was a part of President Trump's first administration, where she held several roles, including Director of Domestic Policy Council. Rollins has a strong preference towards commodity crops, which is of concern to small farmers who may be interested in regenerative and sustainable practice through crop diversification. On February 26, she wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal outlining her 5-step plan to lowering egg prices, a major promise made by the Trump administration. Next slide, please. So continuing with more confirmed roles, I want to present Michael Boren and Tom Schultz. Something to know is that they're both from Idaho, and that's of interest because about 40% of that state is managed through the U.S. Forest, and they both are going to be playing a role in that. So Michael Boren, he comes from a career in fixed income investment management, consulting, and analysis. He's an Idaho ranch owner and founder of Clearwater Analytics, and has been nominated to serve as the USDA's Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment. And so through that role, he will oversee the Forest Service. And Boren has been involved in several lawsuits related to a private airstrip he owns in Stanley in south central Idaho. In 2023, he appealed a local judge's dismissal of his defamation lawsuit against 4 critics of his airstrip. The other person is Tom Schultz, a lobbyist for the previous lobbyist for the timber industry. Schultz will oversee the 154 national forests and 20 grasslands across 43 states. According to a release from the Department of Agriculture, Schultz served as Vice President of Resources and Government Affairs at the Idaho Forest Group, where he led timber procurement operations and managed relationships with government officials. So as we think about the executive orders related to timber, it's interesting to know these intersections in terms of the lobbying industry for that particular industry. Next slide, please. And so looking at pending nominees, we'll start off in the left again. So that is Kathleen Segama. She's a long-time oil and gas industry representative and was nominated to oversee the Bureau of Land Management, an agency that manages 250 million acres of public land concentrated in Western states. Currently, she's president of the Colorado-based oil industry trade group, Western Energy Alliance. If she's nominated, she will join Secretary Burgum to execute that drill baby drill agenda of the Trump administration. Secondly, we have Brian Nesvik, a former director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Many wildlife conservation groups have raised concerns over his nomination. Previously leading what some have dubbed the most anti-conservation wildlife agencies in the United States, Nesvik repeatedly called for weakening the Endangered Species Act, oversaw a 50% increase in hunting tags for mountain lions and black bears, and testified before the US Congress that grizzly bears should lose endangered species protections. Nesvik has faced major national blowback in 2024 for what is known as Wolfgate, after his agency failed to take strong action against a man who captured a juvenile wolf by running her down with a snowmobile. Keeping up with the different gate controversies, we have Neil Jacobs. Jacobs was nominated as the administrator for NOAA and was actually previously a former NOAA chief during part of the previous Trump administration. So an atmospheric scientist by training, he previously has worked in the weather monitoring industry and was cited for misconduct during an incident known as Sharpiegate, when President Trump during the first term used a map with an altered path of Hurricane Dorian that didn't actually exist. As according to Andrew Rosenberg, a former NOAA deputy director, this is a direct quote, he was found to have compromised the scientific integrity of NOAA. And finally, we have Kate McGregor, who was reappointed to the position that she previously held during the Trump administration. And Prior to that role, she also worked as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Lands and Minerals Management. So just a large scope, what we're seeing here is that these folks who are either confirmed or who have been nominated do pose a risk to our public land and oceans. We're seeing, you know, people who are coming from, you know, the most anti-conservation agencies in the US. And we're also seeing folks who are able to, or who have lobbied for industries that may potentially harm our land and ocean, as well as expedited permits, for example, for McGregor. So it's really important to know, first off, who they are, but also their track record. So that's why we want to be able to give you all that form of information. So I'm going to pass it to Olivia so that they could talk about some of the agency memos that have been going on as we think about, you know, these folks who have already are coming into the leadership of these important agencies.
Thank you so much, Val. Very well said about all of these folks, and I will note that they're through our Public Land and Ocean Colectivo listserv, we've sent some of the sign-on letters for organizations to consider joining, opposing a number of these nominees, and many of them have hearings that are yet to be scheduled, and so send me a message if you would like me to bump that message or those sign-on letters for you to join in opposition to these servants of the oil and gas industry who would destroy our natural resources. Briefly, what I want to say about agency memos, which are different policies and guidelines that agencies send out to help the administration move forward on their executive orders, is to point out that what we're seeing is a theme of secrecy, of control. Agencies want to control what you can say and who can and can't speak, as well as policing through some of the sometimes very secretive memos that have leaked and come to the public's light. What you see is literally how the word got out when the Federal Emergency Management Agency said, you can't say climate change. The agency that provides housing to people after catastrophic wildfire, hurricanes, and flooding. You can't say climate change. You can't say immigrant, you have to say alien. You can't say diversity, you can't say inclusion. So language control. A Department of Defense memo that went out to the Pentagon that canceled the Pentagon's recognition of national observances such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day, Juneteenth, Hispanic Heritage Month, the Holocaust Day of Remembrance, and so on. And then the Office of Personnel and Management, and following with the anti-DEI executive order, calling on all federal employees to self-report or rat each other out if they have a history with DEI work as part of their agency. And then finally, the Department of Health and Human Services issuing a policy statement that basically dismantles public comment requirement, again leading back to less control from the people on federal policy, and more control over, again, who can and can't speak. For sure, some of these are way outside of the realm of the Department of Interior or the USDA, where public land and ocean are administered. But what's happening in one specific agency or in one department absolutely can and is likely to permeate across the federal government through these policies and through the culture overall. So that's it, to give you the heads up on what's been going on with memos and to give you a tip on different things that you can be watching for to see how policy and culture is being influenced by the Trump administration and these various leaders like those that Val pointed out in the slides before. Over to Pedro now. Pedro, you want to introduce yourself and dive in?
Yeah, next slide, please. Hey, everybody, my name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the public lands advocate here with Green Latinos, and I'll be brief and concise, but I want to make a strong point first that what we've been seeing so far in terms of the executive orders and the nominations for federal and bureau agency leads is a nothing short of a hostile takeover of the government and agencies that are in charge of our public health and environment by industry lobbyists and the ultra wealthy. Some of the ways that they've been able to steer the government at this point is through these high-level actions and kind of securing that bottleneck of decision making. But another way that the Trump administration is furthering its ambitions is by attacking the working class and by illegal firings of agency staff. And so essentially, even if there are certain mandates that predated the Trump administration, the way to effectively nullify these environmental mandates is by reducing the federal workforce. And so as you can see here, the numbers are still increasing due to lack of transparency from the Trump administration and from DOJ. But what we can see here, at least from some of the more prominent bureaus that Green Latinos monitors, we see that most of the firings have happened from the Forest Service and from the Department of Interior. But more broadly, this is affecting essentially every single agency. And what this means for people like you and me is less wildfire protection, less climate science, less responsible stewardship of our public lands and resources and wildlife, and also less public safety, less trash collection, and ultimately overall lower access to nature, which is our public right, through park closures or through the extreme climate disasters that will disrupt these lands and these resources, such as wildfires in the Southwest in particular. Next slide, please. And so what we can see, though, is that these agency staff firings are one of the most unifying rallying points that we've seen so far in these 6 or 7 weeks of the Trump administration. Not only are we seeing direct resistance from fired working class staff, as demonstrated on the far left, where Yosemite workers here in California hung an upside down United States flag, which is a sign of distress. You're seeing the public rally on these national parks and recreation sites, and also you're seeing national calls to rally and protest these illegal firings and actions as well too. So this is definitely something that Green Latinos is very closely monitoring, and we do think that this can be a rallying point to secure some victories in this administration as well too, because I can't reiterate enough that these firings are illegal. And there is lots of opportunity and public support and legal standing to restore these staff positions as well too. So please stay in touch with us and monitor your emails for action alerts and letters of support as well too, because again, we're dealing with the initial shock of the Trump administration, but there's going to be several points of engagement in the coming months as well too. So I'm going to pass it to the water team to close out to this section, just so we can save some more time for rich discussion. But thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Pedro. So among the many news we've covered, something notable as well is the recent Clean Water Act Supreme Court case. If I can get the first bullet point, please. So just a little bit of background. The Clean Water Act, as we know it now, was established in the 70s. There was a previous version in the 40s, and of course, there's had some changes in the last 50 years as well. But nonetheless, it's been pretty strong for the last 50 years. So last week, there was a Supreme Court case. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. It started with the City and County of San Francisco versus the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act agency. Where pretty much the city of San Francisco argued that the EPA and the Clean Water Act lack precise definitions and quantifiable standards for water pollution. So to a degree, this is true. The Clean Water Act does have quite a few legal loopholes, and it is in certain areas a little bit vague. And so the city argued that the Clean Water Act does not specify exact limits on pollutants. Instead, it just prohibits discharges that are deemed excessive without providing any really clear metrics. So what they talk a lot about is testing the end product. So instead of testing what the city is releasing, the EPA tests the entire body of water. And so the city argued that they are not responsible for the entire Pacific Ocean that surrounds the city. It would add about $2 billion to their budget. And so last week, I believe, the Supreme Court ruled on the side of the city and county of San Francisco, saying that indeed the Clean Water Act and the EPA are vague. And so it really weakened federal limitations on raw sewage discharge into nearby bodies of water. And last bullet point, please. This was a 5-4 decision, which really frees cities to dump substantially much more sewage into rivers, lakes, oceans, and bays. And of course, this doesn't only affect San Francisco or Northern California, but it really degrades the water quality standards around the country. And this is quite troublesome, as you can imagine, because even here in San Francisco, the water quality is already really bad. A couple of years ago, there was a scientific study that came out saying that there was a bacteria affecting fish's brains. So this is definitely a very bad sign for the city as well as countrywide, given that the Supreme Court has really weakened the Clean Water Act. And next slide. Passing it on.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Pedro, for all of that information. This is the part where we turn and talk to each other, and I'm really excited for this exploration with y'all. Like you heard Andrea say in detail at the beginning of this info session, the Secretary Order on Unleashing American Energy is threatening a lot of important and sacred areas all across the United States. The Wilderness Society issued this really handy dandy map I just dropped in the chat that shows you what are some of these mineral withdrawals, resource management plans, and national monuments that are threatened by this secretary order. And what we're going to do today with our breakouts, Cumbia, if you could go to the next slide, please, is join together to develop a sense of understanding of which of these places that you're poised to defend in case the Trump administration undoes the national monument or allows the area with the mineral withdrawal to be mined or revokes the management plan and accelerates extinction of species or water pollution and associated impacts with these kinds of action. What are you watching? What do you want to watch and be poised to defend? And then are there areas not on this map that you think are imminently threatened anyway, that you want to put on the map for the Green Latinos community? So with that, we're going to break out into groups of about 4 or 5 people. If you could get that set up, Cumbia. We're going to have... Let's see. Let's set it for 5 minutes. And we're going to respond to these questions using some breakout slide decks. So I invite everybody to open up these decks, and we're just going to take some turns in the group to quickly introduce ourselves and just put our responses on the table to these questions. Gracias. All right, looks like everybody's making their way back. I hope you had fruitful conversations. Thanks so much for taking the time to dip in and explore our community response to threats to national monuments and other conservation areas imperative to not us just being able to thrive for this in the future generations, also survive the face of the climate crisis and this attempted dismantling of our democracy. We have a couple of minutes for shout outs. So I want to ask y'all to report back by answering this question. What's something you heard that everyone should know? You can come off chat, use a raise hand function, or write it down, whatever way you prefer.
I don't have anything else to share, but I would love to ask Esperanza to continue sharing what she was talking about. She mentioned an eco justice conference in May.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. My point was that communication is key during this time, as we know. That's why this is happening. This group has gotten together to do this, and I really appreciate that you're prioritizing communicating this information out. There's a equal justice conference that the legal community, the American Bar Association does every year, and this year it's going to be in San Francisco. It's May 14th through the 17th. And I think these are places where we need to make sure and have this information and have environmental justice be kind of a common thread that we see in all these, because what happens, we're so siloed in our movements in the different issues and struggles that that oftentimes people don't think about, for example, environmental justice as a civil legal need, right? And so we just need to do that. I know we do a conference every 2 years, the Access to Justice Conference in Washington State, and our focus, we have decided that our focus will be Indigenous communities and hear from them who better to teach us how to how to overcome oppression and you know these things that we've been talking about today than the folks that have been experiencing since the Europeans landed on the shores of this continent. So, and looking at all these different ways that people are coming together to communicate issues that they're involved in, to communicate how they address what's going on, that I know I'm trying to make sure that we keep environmental justice at the forefront and have it be something that people become more aware of, because honestly, there are groups, small groups in our state and big groups, but there's not enough information getting out to communities so that so then people are aware and informed so that they can do something and then partner with other communities, the Indigenous community, the African American community, other communities that are also impacted by these issues. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esperanza.
Andrea, I was just going to share, I mean, to that point of communications, and Renee asked the question about how will we know, you know, how are folks going to spread the word on when this starts to hit the ground in a given state or community. There are also, I've been looped in on a couple of other, you know, networking efforts of environmental groups and others, and I will share this information about what you're doing over with some other folks in our office who are tracking some of those. But it may be that there's several efforts like this that, you know, if there was a place where folks could direct that kind of last minute intelligence, right? This monument is first in line or whatever the case may be, that it could be then shared out, you know, through multiple channels.
That's a great idea.
I'm curious. I just got introduced to this recently. It's a group, sort of a imposing name. They call them National Environmental Network, but it's a number of the bigger than us old, you know, Sierra Club and others, older groups. Is anyone here engaged at all with that? So I didn't know whether Green Latinos itself was already engaged.
Not myself, Pedro, Val, Camila. Looks like no.
Okay. I'll try to connect some dots and get back with you.
Gracias, Brendan. Okay, y'all. Well, thanks so much for contributing to the convo through your words, written and spoken. Last thing I'm going to leave you with for this section is just an invitation to convey any more specific. I feel like we got a lot of great information of y'all of what kind of resources, especially when it comes to community education, information sharing, and pathways to make a meaningful difference here. That is going to guide what we do next. If you have thoughts later, or if you want to invite your fellow Green Latinos members to share their thoughts as well, we have a quick poll where you're invited to just tell us what you need to succeed in defense of public land in the ocean, or share a little bit more about the threatened areas that you are watching and want to stand to defend. So that link's for you there in the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pedro, who's going to talk about one incredibly meaningful action that you can take today.
Yeah, everybody. So thanks for hanging on so long with us as well too. We wanted to close today with something that people can take action for. And also it's a really interesting cause, and really, I think, something that connects us culturally, environmentally, and spiritually in a lot of cases as well too. And so currently we're in the last probably day and a half of an open comment period to enlist the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act. This is an opportunity that, if listed, would not only create federal protections for the endangered species, but also create different special habitat zones to ensure that the monarch butterflies are able to continue their cross-continental migration over multiple generations. So if y'all have the maybe 2 or 3 minutes available after this call, or again, maybe by the end of today, please take a screenshot of, or please use that QR code. I believe we can drop the chat or the link in the chat as well too, if it hasn't been. And share your comments to the federal government. This is, to be quite frank with you, an opportunity we don't know how it will end, especially with the nominations that we all discussed with you thus far. But this has been a process that has been ongoing previous to the Trump administration, and this is an opportunity to show overwhelming support for a species that is declining more rapidly than ever due to climate change and pesticides and habitat loss. And so please join us. This is an opportunity, again, for us to unite against something, or unite for something that, if we can protect the monarch butterfly, we can protect the environments and the culture that connects us all across the Americas. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'll pass it over to the next person to close us out for today. But I want to express my thanks to you all for staying with us.
Felt that in my heart, Pedro. Thank you. Dr. Val, you ready to close us out?
Absolutely. So, like everyone said, thank you so much for being able to participate in our encuentro today. Hope that all the information and the 411 that we gave you on what's going on in the agency and courts, as well as ongoing federal funding and executive orders, has been useful and can help with your advocacy. And as always, Green Latinos is a resource, and so please feel free to reach out to us. And one of the ways that you can get more involved is to make your membership official. So hopefully you're part of the Public Land and Ocean Colectivo, but have you made your membership 100% legit with and so we provide a variety of resources if you become an official Green Latinos member. And you'll be able to use those such as the membership hub, as well as opportunities to amplify and support your work. And of course, there's always an open invitation to participate in Green Latinos events, whether virtual or in person, as well as do research and one-pagers and reports that we produce and can collaborate with if you're interested to help out with advocacy. Next slide, please. So lots of benefits. Please join. And, I just want to give a shout out lastly to comms team, Gumbia, thank you so much for all the assistance. And also want to give a shout out to the Public Land and Ocean team. So for being able to coordinate this. So as I said, feel free to reach out. This is our contact info. And if you want to stay connected with Green Latinos, we have all of the social media and the QR code to make your membership for real, and make sure that you're staying up to date on all the inner workings. I think that's it. So thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Real. Thank you, Paco. Thank you, Andrea. Gracias, Brendan, Esperanza.
Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, and Dolly. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Dr. Camila. Good afternoon, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Gracias. Ciao.